The Silvermoon Great Hall had never tasted such despair. 21 of the realm's most sanctified healers crowded into a sacred chamber built to honor life, not witness its ending. Their golden staffs trembled under vaulted stone arches older than memory. Moonstone wards flickered and died. Crystal vessels of blessed water turned murky. A council of high priests in ceremonial white silk barked incantations at spirit weavers who'd traveled from the northern territories, while the realm's most decorated void reader pressed trembling fingers to the pup's chest and whispered what no alpha should ever hear. The spirit bleed cannot be sealed. Kale Silvermoon, heir to the oldest bloodline in the western packs, was dying. And 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom, 6 figures in ritual offerings, and the combined power of every elite healer within 3 territories couldn't tell anyone why. His small wolf form had turned the color of a winter storm, silver fur darkening to charcoal, black veins spreading across his ribs like cracks in ice, a strange luminescent rot creeping from the wound on his chest like an accusation. Every binding spell unraveled. Every healing ward shattered. And through the shadows of the servants' corridor, hidden behind a stone pillar that had never sheltered someone like her, stood Gwen. 22 years old, daughter of a kitchen omega, wearing a threadbare cloak that had survived 4 winters and boots, held together with leather scraps and desperation. She'd spent her whole life being invisible in this pack, the woman who scrubbed blood from training grounds, who walked the edges of gatherings, who noticed everything because no one ever noticed her. Right now, she was staring at the High Priest's pendant. The one he'd worn for 3 days. The one that pulsed with a sick, oily darkness whenever he placed his hands near the pup's wound. The pendant that matched the exact spiritual signature of the void sting that was eating Kale alive. A signature every master healer in that chamber had walked past 47 times without recognition. Gwen's hands trembled. She knew what it was. Her grandmother, the mad woman who'd been exiled for practicing forbidden Omega Core magic, who'd healed half the pack's outcasts with nothing but blood work and faith before the council burned her grimoires, had taught Gwen to recognize that curse pattern before she could shift. Void sting. Shadow root. Blood poison. The kind of dark magic that required an anchor, a living conduit to feed it. The healers were about to perform a spirit severance, cutting the pup's connection to the pack mind to contain the spread. The real poison was standing in the circle wearing holy robes and a ceremonial smile. Gwen looked at the archway, then at the Gamma guards making rounds, then at her mother's face through the kitchen door, the woman who'd warned her 1,000 times, stay invisible. Stay silent. Don't give them a reason to remember what you are. She thought about what would happen if she was wrong. Then she thought about what would happen if she was right and did nothing. And she thought about the day Alpha Derek had stood in this very hall and declared her bloodline corrupted, her magic unclean, her existence a stain on Silvermoon honor. Gwen pulled her cloak tight, felt the forbidden knowledge burning in her veins like wildfire, and moved. What would you risk to save a life that the world says isn't yours to save? Gwen had learned to move without disturbing the air by the time she was 9 years old. It wasn't a skill anyone had taught her. It was survival. When you lived in the servants' wing of a great pack's territory, a wing so removed from the main hall that you couldn't hear the victory howls or taste the celebration feasts, you learned quickly that your existence was tolerated, not welcomed. You learned to move like mist, to breathe like a held secret, to become so small, so silent, so utterly forgettable that the powerful wolves moving through their stone fortress never had to be inconvenienced by the reminder that you were alive, that you had a wolf, that you had magic in your blood they'd rather pretend didn't exist. Her mother, Isla, had served the Silvermoon Pack for 17 years. She'd started when Gwen was just 5, scrubbing ceremonial chambers on her hands and knees while ranked wolves in silver ceremonial armor stepped over her like she was part of the architecture. She'd worked through a mate bond rejection that nearly destroyed her wolf, a fever that had left her deaf in one ear, and the slow erosion of every dream she'd ever held for her daughter, all so Gwen could have a place to sleep and food that wasn't scavenged from the forest. "We're blessed," Isla would tell her every night, her voice soft with exhaustion, and something that might have been faith or might have been the lie you tell yourself to survive. "Alpha Derek allows us to stay. He lets you train with the pups. We are blessed, Gwen. Don't ever forget that." Gwen never argued with her. But she also never forgot the way the ranked wolves looked through her during training, like she was made of smoke, or maybe just a mistake. She never forgot the time Alpha Derek had banished a healer for teaching Gwen a forbidden binding technique during a moment of kindness. She never forgot the words carved into the stone above the servant's entrance. Omega blood serves. It does not lead. It does not question. It does not rise. Blessed. Sure. But Gwen had also never forgotten her grandmother's final words, whispered with her dying breath as the council's guards dragged her toward exile. "They fear what they cannot control, little star. And they cannot control the magic that lives in mercy." Now, standing in the shadows while an innocent pup died and 21 masters failed, Gwen finally understood. The most dangerous thing she could do wasn't using forbidden magic. It was believing she was as powerless as they'd told her she was. She took one last look at her mother's exhausted, terrified face. Then she stepped into the light. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Chapter 1. Gwen's hands were still bleeding when the bells rang. She'd been elbow-deep in the scullery basin for 6 hours, scrubbing ceremonial platters that had hosted last night's full moon feast, a celebration she'd heard only as distant howls and laughter that never reached the kitchen annex. The lye soap had eaten through the calluses on her palms weeks ago. Now it just burned straight through to nerve, a constant reminder that her wolf's healing factor had stopped working properly 3 years ago. Right around the time Alpha Derek had declared her bloodline severed from the pack bond. Rejected Omegas didn't heal like other wolves. The pack bond was supposed to knit you back together, a spiritual safety net woven through every member's consciousness. When that bond was cut, your body forgot how to repair itself correctly. Gwen's fingers were a map of that forgetting, scars that wouldn't close, bruises that lingered for months, a persistent ache in her bones that felt like her skeleton was trying to collapse inward. The bells meant someone important was dying. 3 tolls for a ranked wolf. 7 for an alpha's bloodline. They rang 7 times. The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. Head cook Marta started barking orders about preparing morning arrangements, memorial oils, ritual breads for the death vigil. The other servants moved with practiced efficiency, their faces carefully blank. You learned not to react to pack tragedy when you were just the help. Grief was a privilege reserved for wolves who mattered. Gwen dried her ruined hands on her apron and slipped toward the corridor that led to the Great Hall. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. Rejected Omegas weren't permitted in the ceremonial wings except to clean them when they were empty. But something cold and sharp was twisting in her chest, a sensation she'd learned to recognize over years of surviving on scraps and intuition. Something was wrong. Not just dying pup wrong. Something deeper. She pressed herself against the stone wall, using the shadows the way her grandmother had taught her. The dark is a friend to the forgotten, Gran had whispered during those secret midnight lessons in the woods, teaching Gwen to see with more than eyes, to sense the spiritual currents that most wolves ignored. Learn to read it, and you'll know things the powerful miss. The corridor opened into the servants' observation alcove, a narrow space behind a stone pillar that let staff monitor the Great Hall without being seen. Gwen had spent half her childhood there, watching pack ceremonies she'd never be part of, learning the hierarchy that would always exclude her. Now she watched 21 healers fail. They moved like they were performing a dance they'd rehearsed, but didn't understand, golden staffs tracing patterns in the air that fizzled and died before completion. The pup Kale. She remembered his name from kitchen gossip. Alpha Derek's only heir lay in wolf form on the central altar, his breathing shallow and wrong. Even from this distance, Gwen could see the darkness spreading through his silver fur like ink in water. But it was the high priest who made her breath catch. Counselor Theron, the realm's most respected spirit weaver, the wolf who'd personally overseen Gran's trial and exile. He stood closest to the pup, his hands hovering over the wound with theatrical concern. And around his neck, barely visible beneath his ceremonial robes, hung a pendant that pulsed with sick, oily light. Gwen's grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, sharp and urgent. Void stings don't occur naturally, little star. They're fed. They need an anchor in the physical world, something to tie the curse to reality. Find the anchor, and you find the poisoner. Her scarred hands clenched into fists, pain shooting up her wrists. She recognized that pendant's signature. She'd seen it in one of Gran's forbidden texts, the ones the council had burned. A soul tether. A device that let the wearer feed darkness into a target while appearing to heal them. Theron wasn't failing to save the pup. He was the reason the pup was dying. And every master healer in that chamber, wolves who'd spent centuries perfecting their craft, who wore their credentials like armor, who'd stood silent while a brilliant hedge healer was exiled for the crime of teaching forbidden knowledge, couldn't see it. Or wouldn't. Gwen looked at her broken hands, at the scars that marked her as cast out, as lesser, as wrong. Then she looked at the dying pup whose only crime was being born to a father who'd destroyed her life. Her wolf stirred for the first time in months, a weak flutter against her ribs. Not a howl. Not even close. Just a whisper that felt like Gran's voice and her own mixed together. If not you, then who? The bells tolled again. A warning. A countdown. A challenge. Gwen stepped out of the shadows. Chapter 2. The memory hit her like a physical blow, stopping her 3 steps from the alcove. She was 11 again, small and shivering in the forest clearing where Gran did her real work. Not the approved healing the council permitted chamomile for sleep, willow bark for pain, the safe, small magics that kept omegas in their place. No, this was the midnight work, the lessons Gran only taught when the moon was dark and the pack's attention was elsewhere. Come here, little star. Gran's voice had been warm molasses and iron, soft enough to comfort, but strong enough to command. She'd spread a leather-bound tome across the moss-covered stone, its pages so old they crumbled at the edges. The ink glowed faintly blue in the darkness, the same impossible color Gwen sometimes saw in her dreams. What you're about to learn will save lives, Gran had said, her weathered fingers tracing symbols that seemed to writhe and breathe on the parchment. It will also condemn you if anyone discovers you know it. Do you understand the difference between those two things? Gwen had nodded, not understanding at all, her child's mind unable to grasp why salvation and damnation could wear the same face. Gran had taken Gwen's small hands in her scarred ones. Even then, Gwen had noticed how similar they looked, the same network of white lines, the same roughness earned through years of work the pack pretended not to see. The void sting is the cruelest curse our kind has ever created. It feeds on life force, yes, but more than that, it feeds on bond. On connection. On the very thing that makes us pack. She'd pressed Gwen's palm flat against the page, and suddenly Gwen could see it. Not with her eyes, but with something deeper, something that lived behind her ribs and tasted like copper and moonlight. The curse pattern bloomed in her mind's eye, spirals within spirals, a geometric nightmare that burrowed into flesh and spirit simultaneously, creating a wound that refused to close because it was constantly feeding on the victim's own pack bond to sustain itself. Most healers can't see it, Gran had continued, her grip tightening. They look at the symptoms, the blackened veins, the spiritual rot, the way the victim's essence bleeds out into nothing. They throw their sanctioned spells at it, their approved bindings, their ceremonial nonsense. And they fail. Every single time. Why? Gwen had whispered, transfixed by the pattern still burning behind her eyes. Because they're treating the wound, not the weapon. Gran had flipped to another page, revealing a counter pattern that made Gwen's stomach lurch. It was beautiful and terrible, a mirror image of the curse, but inverted, reversed, transformed into something that could catch poison and hold it. This is a blood anchor. It's Omega magic, little star. The kind that works through sacrifice instead of dominance. Through connection instead of control. Gwen remembered how her child's voice had cracked with confusion. But why is it forbidden? If it can save people. Because it proves we're not weak. Gran's voice had gone hard as winter stone. The pack hierarchy is built on a lie, that Omegas are lesser, that our magic is inferior, that we exist to serve stronger wolves. But Blood Anchor magic can do what no alpha strength can accomplish. It can take a death curse into your own body and transform it through sheer force of will and love. That kind of power terrifies them. She'd cupped Gwen's face with both hands, her eyes fierce and bright with unshed tears. Alpha Derek and his council fear what they cannot dominate. If they knew what you could become, what your bloodline carries, they would kill you before you came into your full power. Not because you're dangerous to the pack, but because you're dangerous to their control over it. So I can never use it? Gwen had felt something vital shriveling inside her chest, a door closing before she'd even known it was open. I didn't say that. Gran had pulled her close, wrapping her thin arms around Gwen's shaking shoulders. I said they would fear you. But fear and necessity are strange companions, little star. There may come a day when a life hangs in the balance, when all the proper healers with their gold staffs and their credentials have failed, when the only thing standing between death and survival is a rejected Omega girl with scarred hands and forbidden knowledge. She'd pulled back, forcing Gwen to meet her eyes. On that day, you'll have to choose. Stay invisible and let innocence die? Or step into the light and let them see exactly what you are. What am I? Gwen had whispered. Gran had smiled, sad and fierce and proud all at once. A wolf they should have never underestimated. 3 months later, the council had arrested Gran for practicing dark magic. They'd found her texts, burned them in the Great Hall while the pack watched. They'd stripped her of her healer's mark, severed her pack bond, and exiled her beyond the territorial borders. She died alone in the wilderness before the first snow fell. Now, standing at the threshold between shadow and light, Gwen felt her grandmother's ghost pressing against her spine like a hand between her shoulder blades. Pushing, urging, demanding. The pup's labored breathing echoed through the great hall. The healer's staffs flickered and died. And Gwen's scarred hands began to glow with forbidden blue light. Chapter 3. Gwen killed the light before anyone could see it, pressing her palms against her thighs until the glow faded to nothing. Not yet. Not here in the open where 21 witnesses could call for her execution before she even reached the pup. She needed to get closer. Needed to be certain of what she was seeing before she threw her life away on instinct and a dead woman's teachings. The servants' corridor ran parallel to the Great Hall, a network of hidden passages designed to let the help move unseen through the pack's most sacred spaces. Gwen had memorized every inch of it during her childhood, back when invisibility felt like a game instead of a survival strategy. Now she used that knowledge to slip through the shadows, moving toward the chamber's eastern entrance where the incense burners created enough smoke to hide her approach. The closer she got, the worse the air felt. It wasn't just the heavy scent of ceremonial sage and dying wolf. There was something underneath it, something oily and wrong that coated the back of her throat like spoiled meat. Spiritual rot. The kind that only happened when dark magic was actively feeding. She pressed herself against the wall beside the chamber entrance, a carved archway partially concealed by a heavy tapestry depicting the first Alpha's triumph over the Shadow Court. Through the gap between fabric and stone, she could see the central altar where Kale lay dying. The pup's breathing had gotten worse. Each inhale was a wet, rattling sound that shouldn't come from a young wolf's throat. The black veins had spread from his chest to his legs now, creeping toward his heart in branching patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost designed. Alpha Derek stood at the foot of the altar, and for a moment Gwen forgot to breathe. She hadn't been this close to him in 3 years. Not since the rejection ceremony, when he'd stood in front of the entire pack and declared her bloodline, tainted by forbidden practice, and her very existence a threat to Silvermoon purity. He looked older now, the silver streaks in his dark hair more prominent, the lines around his mouth carved deeper. But his eyes held the same cold authority that had ended her life without killing her body. He wasn't looking at her, of course. He was looking at his dying son, and the expression on his face was so raw with grief that Gwen felt something twist in her chest. Something that might have been empathy if she were a better person. If he hadn't destroyed everything she was. There must be something. Derek's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of an alpha's command. Someone. Some technique we haven't tried. High Priest Theron stepped forward, his white robes pristine despite the hours of failed healing attempts. His face was a mask of sorrowful concern, the kind of expression that looked rehearsed in front of a mirror. My Alpha, we have exhausted every sanctioned practice. The spirit bleed is beyond our understanding. Perhaps it is the will of the moon. Don't. Derek's growl cut through the chamber like a blade. Don't you dare tell me it's fate. Not when my son is dying in front of me. Theron bowed his head in apparent deference, but Gwen saw it. The tiny movement of his lips, barely perceptible even to her enhanced senses. Silent words shaped without sound, the kind of subvocal incantation that only worked when you were actively channeling magic through a physical anchor. She focused, letting her perception slip into the space between seeing and seeing the way Gran had taught her. The world went slightly sideways, colors bleeding into spiritual signatures, solid matter revealing the energy that danced beneath its surface. And there, the pendant around Theron's neck was alive, pulsing, feeding. Thin threads of sickly green light extended from the soul tether into Kale's chest wound, burrowing deeper with each of Theron's silent words. Not healing, reinforcing, deepening, making sure the curse held even as he stood there pretending to save the very life he was ending. Gwen's entire body went cold, then hot, then cold again. This wasn't just murder. It was theater. Theron was killing the Alpha's heir in front of 20 witnesses while wearing the robes of his office, using their trust as camouflage for treason. We should prepare the succession rites, Theron said softly, his public voice full of gentle resignation even as his lips continued their silent poison. The pack will need guidance through the grief, my Alpha. We must think of Silvermoon's future. No. Derek's voice broke on the word. He's 6 years old. He's just a pup. There has to be something. Another healer stepped forward, an elderly spirit weaver Gwen recognized as Master Aldrich. Alpha, perhaps if we attempted a spirit severance, cut the pup's connection to the pack bond temporarily. It might contain the spread. That would kill him faster, Gwen said. The words were out before she could stop them, before she could remember that rejected Omegas didn't speak in sacred chambers, didn't contradict ranked healers, didn't exist as anything but furniture to be ignored. But the words were out, and 21 pairs of eyes turned toward the archway where she stood. Theron's face went absolutely still. Not shocked. Not angry. Calculating. And in that single moment of recognition, the way his hand moved fractionally toward his pendant, the way his eyes narrowed with something that looked almost like fear, Gwen knew 3 things with absolute certainty. 1. Theron had been counting on no one recognizing the Void Sting curse pattern. 2. He'd specifically been counting on no one with Omega bloodline knowledge being present. 3. He knew exactly who she was and what her grandmother had taught her. This wasn't just murder. It was a test. A purge. And she'd just failed his requirement that she stay silent. The chamber erupted into chaos, but all Gwen could hear was her grandmother's voice. On that day, you'll have to choose. She stepped fully into the light, her scarred hands already beginning to glow. That's not a spirit bleed, she said clearly. It's a void sting. And I know how to stop it. Chapter 4. The silence that followed her words was the kind that came before violence. Gwen felt it in her bones, in the way every wolf in the chamber went absolutely still, their attention snapping toward her like arrows finding a target. She'd just committed 3 violations in a single breath, speaking without permission in a sacred space, contradicting 21 sanctioned healers, and revealing knowledge that shouldn't exist in the mouth of a rejected Omega. Any one of those things could get her killed. All 3 together? She might not make it out of this room alive even if she saved the pup. Her wolf whimpered somewhere deep in her chest, that broken, half-severed part of her that still remembered what it felt like to be pack, to be connected, to be safe. It wanted her to drop her eyes, to apologize, to crawl back into the shadows where she belonged. Where she'd survived for 3 years by being nothing, meaning nothing, mattering to no one. Gwen. Her mother's voice cut through the chamber from somewhere near the kitchens, sharp with terror. Gwen, get out of there. Now. She should listen. Isla had kept them both alive through sheer determination and the art of being forgettable. Every instinct Gwen had learned at her mother's knee screamed at her to retreat, to let this play out however it would without her, to remember that she'd already lost everything once and barely survived it. She remembered Derek's voice during the rejection ceremony, cold and absolute. Gwen of the Ashbourne line, you are hereby severed from the Silvermoon Pack bond. Your grandmother's crimes have tainted your bloodline. Your presence here is an act of mercy, not right. You will speak to no one of rank. You will practice no magic, sanctioned or otherwise. You will live as what you are, a servant, a shadow, a debt your mother pays with her labor. Do you understand? She'd understood. She'd nodded, mute and shaking, while the pack bond was torn from her chest like roots being ripped from soil. The pain had been indescribable. A spiritual amputation that left phantom aches she still felt in quiet moments. And worse than the pain had been the silence, after, the way her wolf had stopped being able to hear the pack's heartbeat, the way she'd become utterly, completely alone inside her own skin. You are nothing, Derek had said, and she'd believed him. She'd spent 3 years proving him right. Now his son was dying, and the man responsible was standing 3 feet from the altar wearing holy robes and a killer's smile. Gwen's hands trembled, the blue light flickering uncertainly. She could still walk away. She could mouth an apology, drop her gaze, let the proper healers handle it their way. Theron would finish what he'd started. Cale would die. The pack would mourn. And Gwen would still be alive, still invisible, still safe in her insignificance. But she'd also still be what Derek had named her, nothing. Guards. Alpha Derek's voice was Arctic winter and barely leashed violence. Remove her. Now. 2 gamma wolves moved toward her, their hands already reaching for her arms. In seconds they'd drag her out, maybe throw her in the holding cells, maybe just exile her like Gran and save themselves the trouble of a trial. This was her last chance to choose silence, to choose survival. Instead, Gwen saw Cale's small chest struggling to rise and fall, saw the black veins spreading toward his heart, saw a child dying because powerful wolves cared more about hierarchy than truth. She saw herself at 11, small and scared, asking Grand why the magic was forbidden. Because it proves we're not weak. He has a void sting, Gwen said louder, her voice cutting through the chamber as the guards closed in. It's fed through a soul tether anchor. That pendant around the high priest's neck, it's the weapon. Every healing attempt he's made has been feeding the curse deeper. You're not failing to save him. You're being sabotaged. Blasphemy. Theron's voice rang with perfect outrage, but Gwen saw his hand move to cover the pendant. Protective. Guilty. This Omega speaks madness born of her tainted bloodline. She. Then let me try. Gwen's eyes locked on Derek's, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't drop her gaze. What do you have to lose? Your son is dying. Your healers have failed. I'm nothing, right? Just a rejected Omega with forbidden knowledge. So if I'm wrong, you can execute me for the crime of trying. But if I'm right, if you're right, you've just accused the High Priest of murdering my son. Derek's voice was deadly quiet. Do you understand what you're claiming? I understand what I see. Gwen's hands blazed brighter now, the blue light casting strange shadows across the stone walls. I see the curse pattern my grandmother taught me to recognize before your council burned her books. I see the threads of poison magic extending from his pendant into Kale's wound. And I see a child dying while we argue about whether I have the right to save him. The guards had reached her now, their hands closing on her arms. But Gwen didn't resist. She just kept her eyes on Derek's, watching something shift behind that cold alpha authority. Not belief. Not yet. But maybe desperation. Please. The word tasted like ashes in her mouth, like every piece of pride she'd tried to salvage from her rejection. Let me try. If I fail, I'm dead anyway. But if I succeed. If you succeed, Derek said slowly, you'll have proven your grandmother right. That Omega magic is more powerful than everything we've built our hierarchy upon. I'll have proven that a child's life matters more than your pride, Gwen corrected. For a moment, she thought he'd let the guards drag her away. Then Kale whimpered, a sound so weak and small it barely registered as living, and something broke in Derek's expression. Let her through, he said. The chamber exploded into protest. Healers shouting, priests calling for order, Theron's voice rising above them, all with carefully calibrated panic. But the guards released Gwen's arms, and she stumbled forward toward the altar, toward the dying pup, toward the choice that would either kill her or transform everything she'd ever believed about what she was worth. Her grandmother's ghost pressed against her spine, steady as a heartbeat. Now, little star, show them what you are. Chapter 5. Gwen didn't walk to the altar. She ran. The moment Derek's permission left his lips, she knew she had seconds before Theron could regroup, before the other healers could physically block her, before the guards changed their minds about letting a rejected Omega near the Alpha's heir. She crossed the chamber in a blur of movement, her worn boots slapping against ancient stone, her scarred hands already blazing with forbidden light. Stop her. Theron's voice cracked with genuine panic now, the careful mask of holy concern finally shattering. She carries corrupted magic. She'll kill the pup. Gwen reached the altar first. Up close, Kale looked even worse than she'd feared. His silver fur had gone almost completely black, the void sting poison having spread from the wound on his chest to cover nearly his entire small body. His breathing was so shallow she could barely see his ribs move. Minutes. Maybe less. She slammed her hands down on either side of the wound, and the world exploded into light. Blue fire erupted from her palms, wild and chaotic, nothing like the controlled golden glow of sanctioned healing magic. This was raw, primal, Omega core power, the kind that worked through sacrifice and connection rather than dominance and control. It poured out of her in waves, lighting up the chamber like lightning trapped in stone. The 21 healers recoiled, their staffs clattering to the floor. Several wolves covered their eyes. Gwen heard her mother scream her name, but it sounded distant, muffled, like it was coming from underwater. Heresy. Theron lunged toward her, his own hands beginning to glow with the white gold light of sanctioned spirit weaving. I will not allow this abomination to. His power hit hers like a battering ram, and the collision sent a shockwave through the chamber that cracked 3 of the ancient stone pillars. White gold and blue collided in the air above Kale's dying body, 2 fundamentally opposed magics trying to occupy the same space. Theron's magic was refined, controlled, shaped by centuries of tradition and hierarchical structure. It moved like a weapon, precise and deadly. Gwen's magic moved like a flood. It didn't try to fight Theron's power directly. It simply flowed around it, under it, through the cracks in his carefully constructed assault. This was what Omega magic had always been, not weaker than Alpha power, but different. Not a sword, but a river. Not domination, but adaptation. You dare. Theron's voice was barely human now, distorted by rage and something that might have been fear. He pushed harder, his white gold light intensifying until it burned bright enough to leave afterimages. The pendant around his neck pulsed in rhythm with his magic, the soul tether feeding him power even as it continued to poison Kale. Gwen could see the threads now, clear as day. Sickly green light flowing from the pendant into the pup's wound, burrowing deeper with each of Theron's heartbeats. The High Priest wasn't just fighting her, he was actively trying to kill Kale faster, to finish the job before she could save him and expose his treason. "You're killing him," Gwen screamed over the roar of competing magics. "Everyone can see it now, look at the threads. Look at what's coming from your pendant." And they could. The spiritual feedback from the collision of her magic and Theron's had illuminated every spell in the chamber, making the invisible visible. Even the non-seers could perceive the poison threads now, dark green against the white gold of Theron's healing light. There was no hiding it anymore. "She's lying." Theron's voice cracked. "This is a trick, an illusion born of dark magic." "Then remove the pendant." Derek's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The Alpha had moved closer, his eyes fixed on the threads that everyone could now witness. "If you're innocent, High Priest, remove the soul tether and prove her wrong." Theron's hands spasmed toward his neck, protective and guilty. "My Alpha, this is a sacred ritual object. To remove it during a spiritual working would. Remove it. Now." For a single heartbeat, Theron's mask slipped completely. Gwen saw the calculation in his eyes, the rapid weighing of options. He could remove the pendant and lose his weapon. He could refuse and prove his guilt. Or he could. He chose violence. Theron's white gold magic condensed into a spear of pure spiritual force and launched directly at Gwen's chest. Not at her magic. At her. A killing blow designed to stop her heart before she could complete the healing, before she could expose him fully, before the truth could destroy everything he'd planned. Gwen didn't think. She just reacted. She threw herself forward over Kale's body, taking the spiritual spear directly in her shoulder. The pain was instantaneous and apocalyptic, like having her soul torn open and filled with broken glass. She screamed, her blue magic flickering and nearly dying as her concentration shattered. But she didn't let go of the pup. Instead, she did what her grandmother had taught her. What every sanctioned healer in this chamber would have called impossible, heretical, suicidal. She opened herself completely to the Voidsting curse and began to pull it out of Kale's body and into her own. The black veins that had been spreading across the pup's fur started moving in reverse, flowing up through her hands, into her arms, racing toward her heart. The poison sang in her veins like acid and razors, a pain so pure it transcended physical sensation and became something metaphysical. She could feel it trying to latch onto her already severed pack bond, trying to feed on connection that no longer existed. But that was her advantage. The curse couldn't fully anchor in someone who'd already been cut off from the pack. She was already broken in exactly the right way. "Blood anchor," Master Aldrich whispered, his ancient voice filled with awe and horror. "She's performing a blood anchor. I've only seen it once before, 40 years ago, when her grandmother." Gwen's vision started to gray at the edges. The obsidian patterns crawled up her neck, across her jaw, spreading like frost across glass. She could taste copper and moonlight, could feel her wolf howling in agony as the poison tried to kill what was already half dead. But beneath her hands, Kale's breathing steadied. The black began to fade from his fur. His small chest rose and fell with increasing strength. Theron screamed something, a curse, a spell, a desperate final attack. But Derek was faster. The Alpha's clawed hand closed around the soul tether pendant and ripped it from Theron's neck. The spiritual threads severed instantly, and the High Priest collapsed as his stolen power cut off mid-flow. Gwen held on for 3 more seconds, pulling the last of the poison into herself, watching Kale's eyes flutter open for the first time in days. Then the darkness took her, and she fell. Chapter 6. Gwen woke to cold steel pressed against her throat and the smell of blood her own. She was no longer in the Great Hall. Someone had moved her to a smaller chamber, a healing alcove carved into the stone walls with ancient purification runes etched into every surface. The kind of place where the pack brought wolves who might be contaminated, who might be dangerous, who might need to be contained while they decided whether to save them or end them. The blade at her throat made it clear which option was currently winning. Don't move. Derek's voice was arctic and exhausted in equal measure. He knelt beside the stone bench where she lay, one hand holding a ceremonial blade steady against her jugular, the other braced against the wall like he needed the support to stay upright. Don't speak. Don't even breathe too hard. Gwen's entire body was screaming. The void sting poison had carved paths through her veins that burned like rivers of molten metal. The obsidian patterns covered her arms completely now, spreading across her collarbones and creeping toward her heart in branching fractals that looked almost beautiful if you ignored the fact that they were killing her. Kale, she managed to rasp, is alive. Derek's blade pressed harder, drawing a thin line of blood. Breathing normally. The black has faded from his fur. He's asking for water and his stuffed wolf. My son is alive because of you. Then why? Gwen's voice cracked. Speaking felt like swallowing shattered glass. Because you're filled with enough curse poison to kill half my pack. Derek's eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard with the kind of exhaustion that came from watching your child nearly die and then having to decide whether to kill the person who saved them. Master Aldrich says the void sting is still active in your bloodstream. That it's looking for an anchor, something to latch onto so it can spread. He says if you lose control, if the poison finds a way to jump from you to anyone else, it could tear through Silvermoon like wildfire. I won't. Gwen tried to sit up, and Derek's free hand slammed her back down. You don't get to promise me anything. His voice cracked with something raw and terrible. You're a rejected Omega filled with forbidden magic and enough dark curse to end my entire bloodline. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to cut your throat right now and burn your body before the poison can spread. Then do it. Gwen met his eyes, and she was surprised to find she meant it. She'd saved Kale. That was enough. That was more than she'd ever thought her worthless life would accomplish. If this was the price, she'd pay it. I'm not afraid. You should be. But Derek's hand trembled on the blade. My son is 6 years old. He just woke up from a curse that should have killed him, and the first thing he asked, before water, before his mother, before anything, was whether the blue light lady was okay. Do you understand what you've done? You've made him care about you. Made him grateful. Made it so I can't kill you without traumatizing the child you just saved. Something that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob caught in Gwen's chest. Wolves have killed for less. I know. I've done it. Derek's voice went quiet. 3 years ago, I severed your pack bond because I was afraid of what your grandmother's teachings meant. Afraid that if Omega magic could do what Alpha power couldn't, then everything we'd built our hierarchy on was a lie. I destroyed you to protect a system I believed in. His blade lowered slightly, just enough that Gwen could breathe without feeling the edge. Now that same corrupted magic has saved my son's life. And the high priest I trusted, the wolf who wore sacred robes and spoke the moon's words, he was the one trying to murder my heir. So tell me, Gwen of the Ashbourne line, what the hell am I supposed to believe in now? Believe that your son deserves to live. Gwen's voice was barely a whisper. That's all I believed. It was enough. Derek stared at her for a long moment, and Gwen could see the war happening behind his eyes. Alpha and father. Tradition and truth. Fear and gratitude. The poison is spreading, he said finally. Master Aldrich says you have hours at most. Maybe less. The blood anchor technique you used, it pulled the curse into your body, but didn't neutralize it. You're holding it through sheer force of will, but eventually your will is going to break, and when it does... I know. Gwen could feel it, the void sting battering against the spiritual walls she'd erected inside herself. Her severed pack bond had slowed the curse's spread, but it hadn't stopped it. She was buying time, not survival. When I lose control, you cut my throat. Keep your son safe. That's the deal. No. Derek's voice was hard. That's the coward's deal. The deal I would have taken 3 years ago when I thought hierarchy mattered more than truth. He stood abruptly, sheathing the blade at his belt. Master Aldrich says there might be another way. Something in your grandmother's forbidden texts about purification through pack bond restoration. He says if we reestablish your connection to Silvermoon, the pack's collective strength might be enough to burn the poison out of your system. Gwen's breath caught. That's impossible. Pack bonds can't be restored once severed. It's permanent. According to sanctioned law, yes. Derek's smile was bitter. But we've just established that sanctioned law is built on lies and murder. Your grandmother apparently knew techniques that the Council has spent centuries trying to erase. Aldrich found references in what's left of her journals. He thinks he can do it, but it means admitting you were wrong. Gwen understood now. Admitting that rejecting me was unjust. That Omega magic isn't corruption. That your entire hierarchy is. A system designed to keep power in the hands of those who already have it. Derek's voice was hollow. Yes, it means all of that. It means standing in front of my pack and telling them I destroyed an innocent woman because I was afraid. It means validating everything your grandmother died trying to prove. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the rejection ceremony. Not through her. Not past her. At her. It also means you might live. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. And my son might get to thank the Blue Light Lady properly. So here's my question, Gwen. Are you willing to let me try to fix what I broke? Even knowing it might not work? Even knowing the poison might kill you anyway? Gwen's scarred hands trembled against the stone. The obsidian veins pulsed with toxic light. Her wolf stirred weakly in her chest, barely alive, but still howling for something it had lost 3 years ago. Connection. Pack. Home. Yes, she whispered. I'm willing. Derek nodded once, then strode to the alcove entrance and bellowed for Master Aldrich. The blade stayed at his belt. For now. Chapter 7. Master Aldrich arrived with an entourage of the pack's remaining healers, their faces pale and uncertain in the dim light of the purification alcove. But it was the small figure behind them that made Gwen's breath catch. Cale, still weak but standing on his own 4 paws, his silver fur restored to its natural shine, his eyes bright with the kind of innocent curiosity that only children possessed. Papa said you're the Blue Light Lady. Cale's voice was high and soft, nothing like the whimpering, dying sounds Gwen had heard in the Great Hall. Papa said you saved me. Cale, you shouldn't be. Derek started forward, but the pup had already padded closer to the stone bench where Gwen lay, his small nose twitching as he scented the air. Then he stopped. His ears flattened against his skull, and a low whine escaped his throat. You smell wrong. You smell like... His young face scrunched with concentration, trying to find words for something he'd only recently escaped. Like the bad thing that was inside me. The curse transferred to her, Master Aldrich said quietly, moving to stand beside Derek. She pulled the void sting into her own body to save your life, young prince. But the poison remains active. We need to. Cale suddenly snarled, a sound far too aggressive for a 6-year-old pup, his attention snapping toward the alcove entrance. He's here. The bad smell man is here. Everyone turned. High Priest Theron stood in the archway, flanked by 2 guards who looked distinctly uncomfortable with their assignment. He'd been stripped of his ceremonial robes and now wore simple prisoner's garb, his hands bound with silver chains that suppressed his magic. But his face still held that carefully constructed mask of injured dignity. I demand to speak with the Alpha, Theron said, his voice measured and calm despite everything. These accusations are based on the delusions of a rejected Omega performing forbidden magic. I have served Silvermoon for 40 years. You tried to kill my son. Derek's voice was colder than Gwen had ever heard it. We all saw the threads. Saw your pendant feeding the curse. You saw what her corrupted magic made you believe you saw. Theron's eyes swept the room, landing on each healer in turn. Brothers and sisters, you know me. You've worked beside me for decades. This Omega performed blood magic, heretical, dangerous blood magic, and now she lies dying from her own technique's backlash. She needs a scapegoat, someone to blame for her failure. The obsidian veins in Gwen's arms suddenly flared, pulsing with sick light that filled the alcove. She gasped, her back arching off the stone bench as pain lanced through her chest. But it wasn't random. The poison was reacting to something, pulling in a specific direction like a compass finding north. It was pointing directly at Theron. What? Master Aldrich's eyes went wide. The curse signature is resonating. It's recognizing its source. Kale's snarl intensified. That's the smell. That's the bad smell from before. The pup started shaking, his small body trembling with recognition and fear. He touched me. He said prayers, but his hands felt wrong and cold and— The boy is traumatized, Theron said quickly. Confused. The Omega's magic has contaminated his senses. Shut up. Derek's voice cracked like a whip. He was staring at Gwen's arms, at the way the obsidian patterns pulsed and writhed specifically when Theron spoke. Master Aldrich, what's happening? Voidsting curses carry the spiritual signature of their creator, the old healer said slowly, his voice filled with terrible certainty. They're linked to the soul tether that feeds them. When the curse and its source are in close proximity, they resonate. It's trying to return to him. Gwen could feel it now, the poison in her veins straining toward Theron like a leashed dog recognizing its master. The soul tether pendant might have been removed, but the curse itself still carried his mark, his intention, his murderous design. Every cell in her body was screaming that he was the source. This proves nothing. But Theron's voice had lost some of its certainty. Curse resonance can be manipulated by skilled practitioners. Then let's test it properly. Derek's smile was a predator's grin, all teeth and no warmth. Master Aldrich, I assume you can confirm a curse's origin through direct contact? The old healer nodded slowly. If I place my hands on both the victim and the accused, I can trace the spiritual signature back to its source. But my alpha, if I'm wrong, if this truly is a manipulation. You won't be wrong. Derek gestured to the guards. Bring him closer. Theron tried to resist, but the silver chains had weakened him, and the guards were Gammas loyal to their alpha above all else. They dragged him to Gwen's side, close enough that she could see the sweat beading on his forehead, smell the fear starting to break through his composed exterior. Master Aldrich placed one weathered hand on Gwen's poison-blackened arm and the other on Theron's bound wrist. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old healer's eyes rolled back, his body going rigid as he traced the connection between curse and creator. The obsidian veins in Gwen's arms blazed so bright they cast shadows, and in that light, everyone in the alcove could see what Aldrich was seeing. Spiritual threads, invisible until this moment, extending from the poison in Gwen's blood directly to Theron's core. Not to his pendant. To him. To the dark, twisted place inside his spirit where he'd nurtured this curse, fed it his intention, shaped it specifically to kill an alpha's heir slowly enough that no one would suspect murder until it was too late. He created it. Master Aldrich's voice was hollow with shock and grief. Moon's mercy, he created the void sting himself. Not just the soul tether anchor, the entire curse pattern. This wasn't opportunism. This was premeditated murder designed over months, maybe years. Theron's mask finally shattered. I had no choice. Derek's bloodline is too strong. His son would have ruled for decades, centuries even. The pack needs new leadership, a council-based system that doesn't depend on the whims of one alpha. So you tried to kill a child. Derek's voice was barely human now, his alpha power filling the room like suffocating pressure. You stood in my son's healing chamber and fed him poison while pretending to save him. You let me believe he was dying of some mysterious curse while you orchestrated his murder step by step. For the greater good, Theron started, but he never finished. Derek's clawed hand closed around his throat, lifting him off the ground. There is no greater good that justifies killing children. No political philosophy. No restructured system. Nothing. Kale whimpered, pressing close to Master Aldrich's legs. Gwen tried to speak, to say something, but the poison flared again, feeding on the emotional chaos in the room. "Take him to the holding cells," Derek said, his voice deadly calm as he dropped Theron back to his feet. "Full silver chains. Isolate him from the pack bond. His trial begins at dawn." As the guards dragged a now sobbing Theron from the alcove, Derek turned back to Gwen. "You were right about everything. The curse. The pendant. His treachery. And I put a blade to your throat for telling the truth." "You were protecting your pack," Gwen whispered. "I was protecting my pride." Derek knelt beside her bench again, but this time there was no blade in his hand. "Now let's see if I can actually protect what matters. Master Aldrich, begin the bond restoration. Whatever it takes." Chapter 8. The bond restoration ritual required the entire pack's presence, which meant word spread through Silvermoon territory like wildfire. By the time Master Aldrich had prepared the ceremonial circle in the Great Hall, hundreds of wolves had gathered, some curious, most confused, all of them watching their alpha with wary uncertainty. Derek stood at the center of the circle, Gwen barely conscious beside him on a raised platform, the obsidian veins now covering half her body in poisonous fractals. Cale sat at his father's feet, small and serious, his presence a living reminder of what Gwen had sacrificed. 3 years ago, I severed Gwen Ashbourne from our pack bond." Derek's voice carried through the hall, amplified by alpha command and something that might have been shame. "I declared her bloodline corrupted. Her grandmother's magic heretical. Her very existence a stain on Silvermoon honor." Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Gwen could feel their eyes on her, feel the weight of their judgment even through the poison's haze. "I was wrong." The hall went silent. Alphas didn't admit error. It went against every instinct, every tradition, every power structure their society had built over millennia. Not just wrong, unjust. "I destroyed an innocent woman because I feared what her power represented. Because if Omega magic could accomplish what Alpha strength could not, then everything we believed about hierarchy and worthiness was built on sand." Derek's hand moved to rest on Cale's head. "Last night, 21 of the realm's most decorated healers stood in this very hall and failed to save my son. 21 masters with their gold staffs and their centuries of training and their sanctioned techniques. They failed." He looked down at Gwen, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never expected to see directed at her respect. One rejected Omega with scarred hands and forbidden knowledge succeeded. She saw what they couldn't see. She knew what they refused to know. And when the moment came to choose between her safety and my son's life, she didn't hesitate. She used blood magic. Someone shouted from the crowd. "Heretical Omega magic that the Council banned. The Council banned it because it threatened their power." Derek's voice cracked like thunder. "And speaking of the Council, bring them forward." Guards emerged from the side chambers, escorting not just Theron but all 20 of the healers who'd been present during Cale's treatment. They looked confused, indignant, some genuinely frightened. Master Aldrich was notably absent from the group, standing instead beside Gwen with his hand on her pulse, monitoring the poison spread. "You stood in my son's healing chamber for hours," Derek said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. "You watched him die. You watched the High Priest feed him poison with every healing touch. You saw the threads, or you could have seen them if you'd bothered to look beyond your sanctioned techniques. And you did nothing. We followed proper protocol," one healer started. "Protocol that killed my son," Derek roared. "Or would have if a woman you all considered beneath you hadn't broken every rule you hold sacred. Tell me, Master Physician Brennan, when did protocol become more important than saving lives?" The healer opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No answer came. "You're all complicit." Derek's words fell like an executioner's blade. Not in Theron's active treachery, but in something perhaps more insidious, willful ignorance. You had the training to see deeper. You had the power to question. You chose comfort over truth, tradition over innovation, hierarchy over healing. He gestured to Gwen, still barely breathing on the platform. This Omega, this woman you would have walked past without a second glance, holds more courage in her scarred hands than all of you combined. She risked execution to tell the truth. She risked her soul to save a child who meant nothing to her personally. What have any of you risked for your oaths? The silence was absolute. Even the most senior healers couldn't meet Derek's gaze. You're stripped of your positions within Silvermoon territory, Derek declared. Your certifications are suspended pending a full investigation into how our healing system became so corrupted that 20 trained seers couldn't identify a curse pattern that an exiled hedge healer's granddaughter recognized instantly. You want to practice medicine in my pack? You'll start over. Learn from the ground up. And maybe learn some humility in the process. The healers erupted into protest, but Derek silenced them with a snarl that rattled the ancient pillars. Be grateful I'm not charging you as accessories to attempted murder. Now get out of my sight. As the guards escorted the former healers from the hall, Derek turned back to the assembled pack. We've built our entire society on the idea that strength equals worth. That alphas are superior to betas, betas to omegas, ranked wolves to outsiders. We've told ourselves that power justifies hierarchy, that dominance proves value. He pulled Gwen's poison-blackened hand into his own, holding it up for the entire pack to see. This hand has more power than mine. Not physical strength, spiritual strength. The power to sacrifice. The power to transform curse into cure through sheer force of will and love. That's not weakness. That's the strongest magic our kind possesses, and we've spent centuries calling it corruption. Kale stood up, pressing close to his father's leg. The blue light lady saved me when everyone else said I would die. She's not bad. She's the best. Out of the mouths of pups. The simple truth that adults had spent lifetimes trying to complicate. Master Aldrich. Derek's voice gentled slightly. Can we save her? The old healer looked at Gwen, at the poison still spreading despite their best efforts. If the pack bond restoration succeeds, if our collective strength can burn out the curse's remnants, yes. But it requires unanimous acceptance. Every wolf in this hall must choose to welcome her back into the bond. One rejection, one wolf who refuses, and the ritual fails. Derek looked out at his pack, hundreds of faces, generations of tradition, centuries of ingrained hierarchy all staring back at him. I'm asking you to choose truth over comfort. To admit that we've been wrong about power, about worth, about what makes someone valuable to this pack. I'm asking you to save the life of an Omega who's already proven herself more worthy than most of our ranked wolves. He paused, then added quietly. I'm asking you to be better than I was 3 years ago. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Kale shifted into his small wolf form and howled a high, clear note of acceptance and gratitude. Master Aldrich joined him, his ancient voice steady and strong. One by one, other wolves began to howl. Not all of them. Not even most of them at first. But enough. And growing. Derek closed his eyes and howled with them, his alpha voice weaving through the chorus and pulling it together into something unified, something that sounded like pack, like home, like the thing Gwen had lost 3 years ago. Welcome back, Derek whispered, pressing her hand to his chest. Welcome home. Chapter 9. The pack bond hit Gwen like a tidal wave, except instead of drowning her, it pulled her back from the edge of death. She'd forgotten what it felt like. 3 years of silence had made her forget the sensation of hundreds of heartbeats synchronizing with her own, of spirits interweaving until you couldn't tell where one wolf ended and another began. It wasn't just connection, it was belonging, wholeness, the feeling of being part of something vast and ancient that would catch you if you fell. And she was falling. The void-sting poison fought back, tried to use the newly restored bond as a pathway to spread, to infect, to consume. But the pack was ready. Derek's alpha strength anchored the bond, Master Aldrich's wisdom shaped it, and Kale's innocent faith in the blue light lady somehow made it real in a way that transcended magic or technique. The collective will of Silvermoon descended on the curse like an army on a single enemy. Not through dominance. That was the old way, the way that had failed. This was different. Softer. Omega magic writ large. The pack didn't attack the poison. They absorbed it, transformed it, broke it down through the sheer, overwhelming power of acceptance and connection. Gwen felt the obsidian veins begin to fade. First from her fingertips, then creeping back down her arms, the black receding like ice melting under spring sun. The pain didn't disappear instantly, it transformed, became bearable, became something she could breathe through instead of something that shredded her from the inside. It's working. Master Aldrich's voice was thick with emotion. Moon's mercy, it's actually working. The curse is dissolving. But Gwen felt something else happening too, something the old healer couldn't see yet. The pack bond wasn't just burning out the poison, it was changing her. Or maybe it was revealing what she'd always been underneath the rejection and the fear and the years of forced invisibility. Her wolf stirred, stronger than it had been in years. Not just healing but growing, expanding, becoming something she didn't have words for yet. The Omega designation that had defined her entire life suddenly felt like a coat that no longer fit, like someone else's name she'd been forced to wear. What? Gwen gasped as power surged through her veins where poison had been. What's happening to me? Derek's eyes widened. Your spiritual signature is shifting. You're not. He looked at Master Aldrich in shock. She's not an Omega anymore. She never was, the old healer said softly, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. Or rather, she was, but only because we insisted she must be. The Omega designation was always about suppression, about forcing certain wolves into a subordinate role because their power scared us. But look at her now, really see her. Gwen could feel it herself. The pack bond was showing her what her grandmother had always known, what the council had killed her to keep hidden. Omega wasn't a rank. It was a prison. A way to control wolves whose magic worked through sacrifice and connection instead of dominance and force. She's a healer alpha, Master Aldrich whispered, using a term so old most wolves had forgotten it existed. A wolf whose power comes not from commanding others, but from binding them together. From turning weakness into strength, isolation into connection, death into life. That's what your grandmother was, Gwen. That's what they feared so much they had to destroy her before she could teach others what she knew. The last of the poison cleared from Gwen's body, and she sat up for the first time in hours. The pack bond hummed around her like a living thing, and she could feel each individual thread, hundreds of wolves, all connected, all bound together not by hierarchy, but by choice and mutual support. I don't want to be an alpha, Gwen said quietly. I don't want to rule anyone. Then don't. Derek's voice was surprisingly gentle. We've spent too long thinking power means dominance. Maybe it's time we learned that true strength comes from knowing when to lead and when to serve, when to command and when to heal, when to stand above and when to kneel beside. He looked out at the assembled pack, at the wolves who'd chosen to welcome Gwen back, who'd chosen truth over tradition. Silvermoon has operated under a single hierarchy for as long as any of us can remember, strength above all, alpha at the top, Omega at the bottom, everyone knowing their place and staying in it. That system nearly cost me my son. It did cost us Gwen's grandmother and countless other wolves who could have made us stronger if we'd let them. Derek's voice grew stronger, filling the hall with alpha command softened by something that might have been wisdom. I'm proposing a new structure. A dual leadership. I remain alpha of strength and strategy, guardian of territory and tradition. But Gwen, he turned to her, and there was no condescension in his gaze, only respect. Gwen becomes alpha of spirit and healing, guardian of knowledge and transformation. Where I lead through power, she leads through wisdom. Where I protect through force, she protects through connection. The pack erupted into murmurs, some shocked, some outraged, many thoughtful. The idea was radical enough to be heresy, traditional enough to have ancient precedent. Our ancestors had healer alphas, Master Aldrich said, his voice cutting through the noise. Before the council standardized everything, before we decided one type of power was superior to all others. We had packs with multiple forms of leadership, with different kinds of strength valued equally. We were more resilient then. Stronger in ways that pure dominance hierarchy can never achieve. Kale padded forward and pressed his small head against Gwen's hand. I think the blue light lady should be important. She saved me. She's brave. Out of the mouths of pups again. The simple truth cutting through centuries of complication. Gwen looked at her hands, no longer scarred and bleeding, but marked with faint silver lines that traced the patterns where the void sting had been. Not scars of damage, but marks of transformation. Proof that she'd walked through death and come out the other side carrying something precious. I'll do it, she said quietly. Not because I want power or recognition, but because my grandmother died trying to teach a truth that this pack needs to remember, that there are many ways to be strong, many forms of magic that matter, many types of wolves who deserve to be valued. She stood fully now, steady on her feet for the first time since the healing. And if I'm going to honor her memory, I'm going to make sure no other Omega Wolf grows up believing they're worthless. No other child learns that their magic is corruption. No other grandmother dies alone for the crime of being powerful in a way that scared the comfortable. Derek extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Gwen took it. Not as subordinate to superior, but as equal to equal. Two different types of strength, choosing to work together instead of competing for dominance. The new moon rises, Master Aldrich said, his voice filled with something that sounded like hope. And with it, a new silver moon. May we be worthy of this second chance. The pack's howl rose again, but this time it wasn't just acceptance. It was celebration. It was transformation. It was the sound of a hierarchy cracking open and something better beginning to grow in its place. Gwen closed her eyes and howled with them, her voice joining the chorus not from the bottom, but from a place she'd never been allowed to occupy before, the center, the heart, the place where broken things came to be made whole. Her grandmother's ghost finally went quiet, satisfied at last. The blue light lady had come home.